Good morning and good evening, everyone. I'm Angelina, and welcome to the fourth session of Distinguished Alumni Speaker Series. And today we are going to talk about the topic of career development and how to prepare for your next job. Making career decisions can be quite confusing and challenging sometimes, especially given the current complicated situation and the new normal in the post-COVID-19 era. We may have to rethink our original plans, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed by all kinds of career opportunities and challenges. But here we have some good news for you. Today, we are very honored to invite distinguished alumni speaker Peter Koo, who is a trusted advisor that has greatly inspired and guided thousands of talents to identify and realize their dream career paths. Throughout this session, I believe his strategic advice might equip you with some new insights and directions to think about your career path. And I also hope for some of you, this will be the magical, life-changing 1 hour to find out your true calling and your long-term career goals. And before introducing Peter to all of you, please allow me to briefly introduce myself and the agenda today. Angelina currently works at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization at its Investment and Technology Promotion Office, and I graduated from NY Shanghai back in 2018. And for today's agenda, first of all, I have prepared some questions for our speakers, and we will have conversation for about 40 minutes. And then for the last 20 minutes, I will open the floor to all of you. And for all the attendees, please feel free to ask any questions by typing it down in the Zoom Q&A box throughout the entire session. And hopefully we will cover as many questions as possible. So now, please allow me to formally introduce our alumni speaker, Peter Koo, to all of you. Mr. Peter Koo is a financial services partner at Egon Zehnder and is its global leader for the firm's asset management practice. Prior to transferring back to the United States in 2018, Peter was leading the financial services practice across Asia Pacific. He has particular expertise in asset management and guides clients in board search, CEO succession, talent management, and senior leadership development. Prior to joining Egon Zehnder, Peter was a consultant with A.T. Kearney, based in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Kuala Lumpur. Previously, he focused on risk management at Booz Allen Hamilton in Singapore during the Asian financial crisis. Peter has received his bachelor degree in computer science and mathematics from the University of Rochester and an MBA from the Stern School of Business at New York University. In his leisure time, Peter enjoys reading, long runs, and spending time with his family. So now let's warmly welcome Peter. So Peter, could you please share with us more about your professional background and career path?
Sure. Thank you, Angelina, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Shin, and all the other the organizers who set this up. You keep using the word distinguished alumni. I don't feel very distinguished. I feel very honored just being in front of fellow NYU alumni and graduates, or even students and faculty. So thank you for this honor. So this is a way of the way I'd like to think of it as giving back to something that's been very special and that launched my career. Just a very brief background about myself, and Angelina already did the highlights. So I was born in Taiwan. I grew up in New Jersey, came to the States, I think 1975 at the early age of 7. I did all my education here in the East Coast, and she's absolutely right. It was after my business school from Stern in '95 that I ended up going to Asia with Booz Allen, and then the rest was history. And that was really by chance and luck that I ended up growing with the Asian kind of dream, if you will, back then, from '97 all the way into '96 all the way until 2018. When my family and I decided to eventually move back to the U.S. This topic of career development is very special to me because it was not by design, and I would encourage you, if there's anything that you can take out of this whole discussion today, is try not to plan too much, try to be really open-minded as you go through your career. Your next job is not going to be your last job. Very rarely it will be. If it is, that's great. But just if anything, that's keep a really wide open lens in terms of how you should be thinking about your career. So this is very special to me because where I ended up was really by accident. I went from computer science programmer to management consultant to now executive search, and now I'm actually doing coaching. How did you ever imagine going from programming C++ to executive search? So again, I'm an example of someone who didn't really plan, but ended up going with the flow. So again, without going into too much more, I will be the materials that we're going to be showing you today. I would encourage you not to take a lot of notes because all this will be made available to you after the event. So I would just focus on listening, asking great questions, and just enjoy the ride. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your introduction. And as a trusted advisor to many large financial institutions, we know that you have particular expertise in guiding your clients in the field of talent management and leadership development. And you have also supported and witnessed thousands of talents to grow and shine. Therefore, what strategic advice you would give to our students when planning and pursuing their career paths? And how would you suggest them to set their short-term goals and long-term goals?
Okay, well, thank you. Let's start with this slide here. And the goals, this very important point about your short-term goal and long-term goal. Everyone's goal or objectives will change over time. And the way I like to think about it is if you're in your 20s, you're probably at a point where you're just trying to learn a lot. You're trying to get your first job. You're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. Usually when you hit your 30s, your priorities start changing. It's maybe about wealth creation. You want to maximize, like making lots, be a banker or whatever, do a .com. And then in your 40s, you start getting to the work-life balance. Again, your priorities may change again. And then when you're 50s, maybe you want to try to take off in your career, try something really something new, give back to society, do a non-for-profit, or even just trying to hold on to your job, right? And then in the 60s, 50s, 60s, you start doing board work. So the elements of careers is really two parts. I like to think of it as there's the tangible aspect, and I kind of outlined it here as cash, promotion, status, right? And this is very it sounds quite mercenary, but yeah, ultimately you're trying to work so that you can actually sustain your life, right? I always make a joke that I love to play. People pay you to go to work, right? You know, I love to play golf, but unfortunately I'm not good enough, so I have to pay to play golf. I wish someone would pay me to play golf. But in terms of how you should think about, one of the elements is really about cash. It's about the liquid, and this is usually a reflection of how other people would value your effort and all the investment that you've made in your education to get to where you are. The subjective part is really around job satisfaction, career satisfaction. You know, some people would explain that sometimes it's not necessarily what you do, but more importantly, who you do it with. So culture becomes very important. So there's these different elements, and there could be other elements, but this is the way I kind of try to simplify how you should think about different goals as wherever you are today in your stage of life. You know, you maybe jot it down on paper. You can put a percentage weighting, but just think about it along these two lines. There is the financial aspect, the wealth creation aspect, and then there's the softer aspect in terms of what's important outside of work, right?
So that's a very interesting breakdown. So the perfect career success might equal the objective plus the subjective one, right? And for our students and alumni, it is also very important to balance the objective satisfaction and the subjective expectation. So Peter, I'm wondering, after you have witnessed and guided so many talents pursuing their respective career paths, have you identified any typical career patterns that you would like to share with our students?
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, um, I mean, these are just broad patterns that I've seen. Again, time, what we just talked about, the 20s, 30s, 40s, as you age. There's the way I kind of see it, there's the linear, there's a spiral, expert, transitory, and they're all quite self-explanatory, but I'll just highlight some of the parts. The many most people would fall into what I define as the linear career path, right? So you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, this is where people just kind of move up systematically, develop, get promoted, learn more content, start managing people. And then it becomes less about what you know, it's about who you know and how do you manage people and how do you work with people. And those are more the over time you recognize and you get promoted. And it's interesting in this linear career path, if you see the red part, there's a point in time, I would say usually in the late 40s, early 50s, I would say that there's quite a bit of a point of inflection where people actually really take off in their career or they get stuck, right? And we could talk about how you hopefully avoid being stuck. And there's no surefire way, but a lot of this is also, there's an element of luck. But let's see what is it that we can actually control. I would focus on people who just kind of develop content, learn, be patient, try not to take any shortcuts. Don't think of, there are people who actually say, oh, okay, you can work 18 months and then you can move on to the next thing. I would encourage you not to do things like that. Just be very patient and systematic. Invest in yourself and your own career and your own career development, just like you would invest in an education. Some of you may end up going back to business school. You don't want to get into what I then define as the spiral. You kind of get lost. You get tempted by, oh, if I join here, I can make another 30, 40% more, but then that there's risk and somehow the boss gets fired and you lose your job, and then you have to you go up and down. So you can see that it just gets pretty messy, and people start questioning how systematic have you been and how thoughtful have you been in planning out your entire career. Some of you who want to be let's say, go into academia or research, PhD, 博士, right? So this is what we call the expert kind of career path, where you just kind of say, you know what, I'm going to be an expert. I want to be a good analyst, or I want to be a great scientist, and that's it. And that's my aspiration. And you can do very comfortably and just be very happy there, right? And then transitory are people who are just trying different things. They work for money. Sometimes they wanted to work for something else. They want to take time off. So again, not to say that anything is right, but I'm assuming that 90% of you are probably in the upper left-hand corner, the linear path, and which is why you're here today. So that's something that we'll talk about, how we can try to help do some risk mitigation along that career path.
Great, that's amazing. Thank you very much for sharing these career patterns. And I believe it will help our students and audience today to refer to as a guideline from time to time through their career paths. And I hope everyone will identify and find your favorite or most suitable career pattern and stick to it. And besides the pattern itself, I always believe the effective networking is also very important accelerator and catalyst to benefit and boost one's career. And we are also aware that the networking is a long-term strategy, which might take months or even years to build one's professional reputation, so that when the connected people hear your name, they know who you are. And when connected people look you up on the internet, they can easily find information that affirms your expertise. So in terms of the networking process, Peter, do you have any suggestions for our students and alumni?
Sure. If we go to the next slide, page 4, there's networking is actually really important. And the way to think about networking is it's not a one-time thing. It's something that you would need to continue doing essentially for your entire life, right? Networking actually starts as early as many of you know in China. it starts with your parents, right? Your parents are networking on your behalf, trying to get you into good schools. And once you're in schools, you're also networking, trying to get into good universities and get internships along the way. So the way, first of all, to think about networking is it's something that you do your entire life, inside of work and outside of work. Now, I just try to simplify this, and there's so many different inputs and stakeholders involved as part of your journey of networking. There's the social media, right? Through WeChat, Facebook, which is, I think it's still banned in China, but anyway, so, and just the traditional path. There's also the alumni network here at NYU, right? Your friends, classmates, if you go to getting advanced degree from your postgrad classmates, there's conferences, networking through conferences. And then there's the additional source, which is the executive search or the headhunters, Liato, right? And that they are your friend and your foe, right? But they're there to help broker and help facilitate your career. And what I meant by friend and foe is you have to be careful, because headhunters are also doing things for themselves. They may not always be thinking in your best interest. So what you should take away from this is there's a lot of different sources. Be deliberate, be in control of how you're thinking through the whole networking process, and it's a lifetime journey. Now, if we go to the next slide, how do you think about the prepare for networking? So always start from number one, have a good CV, right? CVs, your resume is something that really tells about your story. And it should be a story that should demonstrate that you've been quite deliberate, quite in control of the entire process of where you are today. Why did you go from this job to this job? Why did you get recognized? What did you do in your role that got you promoted into the next stage? And it should be a story of what you actually did in terms of the CV. But the thing that many people, as they construct their CV, which is, I just want to spend some time to talk about the CV part. As you construct the CV, you should also be thoughtful, thinking through not about what you did, but also how you did it, right? I've seen many CVs where people say, I help enable this, or I help lead this, I help. A good interviewer, and we'll get to that later on, a good interviewer will also be focusing on, well, how did you do that? Who did you do it with, right? And what did you learn from that, right? So it's something that you may want to think about. You don't have to do it right away in your 20s, but you definitely need to be able to be reflective, to be thinking about that in your 30s or 40s. But as you construct your CV, always keep that in mind as you write down what you did, because you have to be prepared to talk about how you actually did it. Preparation. So once you, and of course, proofread your CV and just get someone else to look at it. And there's a lot of support out there that can actually help you. In terms of the preparation, again, take those CVs, identify people as part of networking, figure out who are those people that actually are important to you. The way I like to describe it, you're going to meet so many people throughout your entire life. We've been trained to always think about helping people think through who are their, quote, green people. I like to put the networking process as green people and red people, right? Green people are the people who can really help you. Red people are the ones who can actually distract you and even take up a lot of your time that may not go anywhere. Now, it's not saying that you need to be so calculating in terms of who you actually spend your time with, because it's a small world and you shouldn't cut off your, quote, network. But you need to be quite deliberate in terms of saying, okay, well, consciously, I'm going to spend more time here. There are some red people. I know that maybe I like them as people, but they're not really going to be additive and helpful as part of my networking process. And you want to be able to find as many green people as possible, right? And of course, once you figure out who those green people are, then you can be in a better position to figure out how you're actually networking. Now, there are people that you know very well, like your classmates or the school that you went to. And then there are people that you know less well, and that's through a lot of networking, through conferences or recruiters or people's friends, right? So that's the degree of familiarity on this slide. Process, and I talked about this before, which is all about, it's a continuous process. It's not a one-time thing. I've been, and I'm open. I've already mentioned this to Angelina and to Shing that the reason why I'm doing this is I'm very open to getting being part of your network, if you will. But one thing that I've noticed is that there are good networkers, and they're like one-off networkers. The one-off ones are the ones who say, "Can you help me?" And then it ends up, then after that, there's no follow-up. So it's not a genuine connection that you're actually making. It seems quite transactional, and people will see that. And that's okay. But if you really want to be effective at this, try to be very deliberate. Write down on a spreadsheet, I've contacted this person here. And then after you have your discussion, say, can I follow up with you in 3 months' time? And just make a jot down to remind yourself, who are those people that you really want to follow up with, and in what means. Just have really, when people are open to connect with you, take the opportunity to get to know them as a human being, as a person, and even get their mobiles or emails, and get the permission. Can I do this? If I have other questions, can I follow up? And which goes to the follow-up part. Just having very specific process in terms of how you actually have that open dialogue and the continuous follow-up process. If you go to the next slide, just additional thoughts about networking is just keep it personal, embrace it. If you're spending time, if you're able to connect to someone, make it really special, make it genuine. It's not a one-off event, and also have realistic expectations. It's not this whole networking thing. You just don't think that it needs to translate into something a month from now. It could take a couple years, right? It's such a small world out there. You just don't want to burn any bridges. So keep a really open mind as you speak to people and connect with people. Again, it's like investing in a marriage and investing in your children. Just really embrace it. Make it part of you. Don't make it like a separate job, right?
Right, networking is a long-term strategy, and I'm quite interested in your classification of the red people and the green people, and I'm also very curious, like how would you like differentiate or classify like who will be the red people or green people from the first sight, or you might like discover that or identify that after a long process with these connections.
Yeah, so it comes through. That's a very good question, Angelina, because I too, even to this day, I try to personally also try to figure out who are my green people and who are my red people. And you could even apply this red people, green people, red people to your job. So for example, if you're in sales, you want to be able to figure out who are the ones that you should invest time with, that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, but also who are those who are really you have a connection with, that there's maybe you have something in common. And again, if you make it personal, you'll have a better feel of who those people really are. The red people are probably ones who you can feel it, that they're probably thinking more about themselves and less about the relationship with you, right? Which is why I'm saying that when you make these connections and you do network, try to put your heart into it, invest the time and develop that that really tight relationship, right? It needs to be personal. I'll give you an example. In my world of executive search, we have clients and we have candidates, right? And you could be really transactional and say, okay, well, I'm going to work with the client and find candidates to fill a role for the client and leave it at that. But I have to tell you, the relationships that I would develop, we should not stop at just focusing on the client. You should also focus on the candidates, right? Some of my best clients are actually candidates that I've even had to turn down because they didn't fit the role, right? You're investing time in speaking to someone, make it special, right? And just develop the trust, put your A game, show them who you really are. And again, it's about being you, being open, and establishing a really tight bond, a relationship. It's incredible how many thousands of people I've met. If I look at my Microsoft Outlook calendar, I probably have, I don't know, maybe 8,000 people that I've spoken to at some point in time in my last 17 years with Egon Zehnder. And there's probably a lot more people that I've spoken to, but these are probably out of the 8,000. I probably still keep in touch with maybe several hundred. But to show you how small the world is, even though I transferred back to the US 3 years ago, I still get a lot of calls from people, friends, clients, people in interactions I've had in Asia, which still drags me back doing Asia stuff, which is great because I really enjoyed that connection. I don't see it as work. I see it as part of my life.
That's awesome, and it's very helpful to have this idea, like the red and green people, like bearing in mind from the early stage of career. And I also believe, like, to be genuine and sincere to people around you might be the key to find your green people, and also to make yourself the green people to everyone around you.
That's a really good point, to make yourself the green people to other people as well, right?
Right.
And part of that is I think I wrote the point about don't burn any bridges. You don't know who you meet, who you'll need help with in the future. So just make sure that whatever interaction you have, make it impactful, so that when people need you, or if they think about something, oh, I remember that person that I met 3 years ago. I wonder how they're doing, right?
Right, like all dots will connect in life finally.
Yes, yes.
And when like the young professional starts their career with full ambition, if you are on the other side of the table, what do you think HRs and the search firms would value most when looking at the potential candidates? And what driving factors might influence their recruiting decisions?
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide then, and just talk about how people assess people, and you could think of this as we mentioned, it could be HR, it could be the hiring manager, it could be part of the networking again, right? Because sometimes you're speaking to someone that may not have a role, but oh, I like this person, I'll find a role for that person, right? So the way you're always being assessed is, I describe it as, there's the external part and there's the internal part, right? So whenever there's a role in a company or an organization or whatever it may be, association, whatever it may be, they could always look at their internal bench. They could always look at the people that they have. Should I try to upgrade, develop people that I have, or should I look outside and recruit them into my organization? So the purpose of this discussion today will focus more on the external orientation, and which is on the left side. And we talked about the CV. We will then, I'd like to talk about the competencies, the things that they they look at when they look at you as an individual. And more importantly, people actually start looking at potential. It's not what you can do today, but where you can actually be in the future. And then, of course, there's all these different psychometric tools. And psychometric tools, many companies are adopting now because they want to understand more about the behavior of individuals, how they manage stress, how they manage teams. And usually it's through some kind of role playing and or some kind of online tool. So this is just a broad framework. For the purpose of today's discussion, it's really on the left side on external orientation. If you turn to the next slide, along the competencies and the potential, this is a simple framework that we as a firm normally look at, which is the past, present, and future, right? And the way to think about the past is past is your CV. It's already happened. You can't change that. You study there, you work there, right? These are things that got you to where you are today, right? The present are the things that people would typically be interviewing you based on. And the interviews are based on competencies. You know, how strategic are you? How commercial are you? How much of a team player are you? And so on and so forth. All right. And then the future are things that it's about traits. And the way to describe, I help you understand the difference between present and future. Present, the competencies are things that you can actually improve on. So for example, if you're not strategic enough, read a book. If you're not commercial enough, go to business school, right? It's something simple like that as an explanation, right? If your personality is kind of abrasive, get a coach, right? So these are things that you can actually improve on the scale of present. Future is something that's actually tougher to improve, because it's the way to think about future, and we have psychologists in our firm that look at potential, and we've done this with Harvard Business School. Maybe after this I can share it with you, Angelina and Xing, so you can distribute it. There's a couple Harvard Business School cases about our potential model. Potential is about energy, where you get your own personal energy from. And it's not like it's you're more curious than than others, and that's a good thing. There's some people who are just genuinely curious. So I'll use my kids as an example. I have twins, a boy and a girl. They'll be 12 next month. They still love me, I think. Love us, I think, but they're going to be teenagers soon. But the way to think about it is, my son, I would describe him as a highly curious person. He just loves to read. He loves to ask me why. He loves to get himself into trouble, tries to figure out this Google, that Google, and he's just very genuine curious person, which often gets him into a lot of trouble with mom. My daughter, I would describe her as someone who likes to read a book, sits in a corner, glad, be very good, and just not try to do more than she really needs to do. And that's okay, but that's her personality. Now, if I was to say, Jonathan, be less curious, stop getting yourself into trouble, or Patricia, try to read more books and ask more questions why, and you could see that it's just not natural to them. It would create more energy to either scale down for my son or scale up in curiosity for my daughter. Because the potential, these traits are things of where your natural energy level is, right? And you can move up and down, but it just means that they just require people to have more or less energy to readjust, right? So that's what the potential is. And the reason why potential is very important is because this is actually the driver of what actually defines your future in terms of career. whether or not you're going to be a future CEO, whatnot. So a perfect example, top CEOs are usually very high, natural high energy on curiosity and engagement, right? Because it's all engagement is about the people, right? It's about helping people and working with people, high level engagement. Curiosity is because they just really want to learn, right? And even insight is about the vision. I have a dream. This is where I want to go. I don't know how to get there, but I'll find the people to get me there, right? So it's usually something like that. And then you have some people who are just really driven, and they just want to like fixed income traders, is determined to get the financial performance so that they can get lots of money, and that they're really driven by determination. They're going to make a lot of enemies along the way, but that's what really drives them, right? And it's just a factor that many recruiters look at in terms of the potential. And we'll show you more about that potential model in a moment. And then, of course, development is a combination of the readiness and potential. So what I'm saying is external recruiters and even hiring managers really look at people around where they are today and where they could be in the future, right? If you go to the next page, page 9. Okay, so this is where I talked more about the differences between competencies and potential, right? So again, these are competencies, are things that you do on the job that you can improve on. And potential are things, traits that's actually bigger than the whole. And it's really thinking broadly about what you can actually do as an overlay to your competencies, right? I'm just going to go with the next, and again, these slides will all be made available to you, and I'm just conscious of time because I'd like to leave time for Q&A. If we go to the next slide, this is an example of the competency model. If you go to page 10. Thank you. So these are just examples that at least us as a firm, we look at on competencies. There's usually about 3 groupings of competencies. There is the leadership aspect, there's the thought leadership aspect, and then there's the people leadership aspect, right? And you can see that there's so many different elements. There's strategy, there's understanding the market, innovation, results, change. So what you can do when you, after today's session, is kind of take a step back, look at what you've been doing today, and see which one of these competencies actually mean anything to you. Because people are not going to be evaluated based on the 10 competencies that are listed here, right? So for example, if you're going to be a CEO, there's only like 4 or 5 competencies that are important. If you're going to be a marketing director, there's probably another 4 probably total of 4 that's going to be very important, right? It's maybe, for example, developing talent is probably not a huge thing unless you're going to go up the management track, right? And then along the dimensions, there's the reactive, active, and proactive. And I have to tell you, most people, good executives, as you progress through your career, are probably around a 3 and a 4, right? Very, very few actually are that proactive. So I think in the thousands of people that we've assessed, there's probably just really a handful that would be described as transformational leaders, right? As you can probably guess, transformational leaders are people who actually shape the industry, shape the future, for like the iPhone, right? Like Uber. I mean, these are very different models that have been set up. Even things like WeChat or Alipay, or I mean, a lot of these things just kind of happen, maybe by chance, but they just happen to be at the right place, right time, right? So try to think about these dimensions, and I just wanted to share some of these bullets with you so you can kind of think about how would you present yourself, or what is it that you've been doing that would and how would it be perceived by others as you even interview for different positions, right? and again, these are things, if you think that you're probably a 1 or a 2, then you need to start thinking about, well, what do I need to do to get to a 3, right? And again, many of us probably think that, oh, we're a 3 or a 4. I can anticipate future needs. Well, you maybe you can, maybe you can't, but if you really think about it, what is it that you've actually done to demonstrate that you can anticipate future needs, right? On the next slide, and this is just an example on page 11, to just give you an example of what some of these things mean. So leading teams, if you're a 3, how are you in terms of seeking input from the team, right? Or are you probably more interacting, you explain why, right? Why you're doing things, as opposed to really getting engagement with your colleagues, right? Even delivering results. Are you just doing things because you're being told and just trying to do a better job? Well, that means you're just being kind of reactive, and that's okay, because as you get promoted up through your career, you'll start moving it further and further up, and that's what people are going to be looking at. How fast can you move up in those elements, going from level 3 to 4 of, let's say, delivering results, right? Am I only thinking about the thing that I'm doing, or am I thinking about broadly about how it impacts the company, right? So these are things that you can try to do to be a little bit more proactive over time. Okay, and again, if you have questions around this, feel free, we can take it after this. The last slide here, again, this is really around the potential model on the next page. So these are the elements that the traits that I was talking about around curiosity, insight, engagement, determination. And it's not that one, if you're emerging, you're worse than someone who's extraordinary, right? It's really a function of where you get your own personal energy. So think about yourself. Where, if I was to be true to myself, or even ask your friend to ask you to share what they see in you, are you a really curious person, right? Just how are you someone that just does what you're being told to do, right? How important is it to work with others? Do you get frustrated, and why do you get frustrated, right? And then in terms of determination, determination is some people think of it as just trying to do the job, but a real strong person who does determination is someone who actually, it's not about you doing it, but it's about somehow influencing everyone around you to believe that that's the right thing to do, right? And that's what a really solid leader would be thinking about. Okay, Angelina, any?
Right. Thank you so much for your inspiring and well-rounded sharing. I really learned a lot, and I believe our students and alumni will have a more systematic and optimistic overview of their potential career paths after listening to your sharing and suggestions. And now I would like to open the floor to our audience. And I noticed our audience are very active today and submitted several interesting questions. So here we go. The first question comes from Sherry Drum. Sherry asked Peter, how would you advise on networking with people from very different cultural background? How do you click with them when there's little shared experience?
That's a very good question. Let's see. I think connecting with others, people with different background, a lot of it actually starts less about them. It's more about yourself, right? At least this is just a thing that I tried that I think works, has worked for me. Again, I grew up in the States, even though I'm from, my parents are from Shanghai, and I was born in Taiwan, and I never worked in Southeast Asia. I never worked in Thailand and Indonesia, but then I did. And a lot of this really starts with yourself. To engage and network with people of different backgrounds and whatnot, first of all, you need to be comfortable with who you are as a person, and where you actually come from, and how much you're willing to open up in sharing about yourself. Because I always, the more open, and I say in general, it's worked. I haven't been too burned. Well, it hasn't kind of backlashed against me, but I'm the type of person who would just open up and talk about, like, for example, in today's session, talk about my family. I don't know any of you, and I'm talking about my son and daughter, and that just kind of, at least in my so many years, it seems to work. And it's I hope it comes out as genuine, and if it becomes genuine, people will open up and talk about themselves. I mean, people in general love to talk about themselves. And by talking about themselves, it opens up a two-way dialogue about other things. And if you can create a dialogue connect with someone that they end up talking more than you asking, that would be a great conversation. And that's usually a good indicator. I mean, it's interesting. Some of the best meetings I've had with people are ones where actually I didn't say much, and because they were just so open to sharing so much about the knowledge about themselves personally, about their work, about the strategy of the company, that they walk away feeling, wow, that was a great conversation, even though I didn't really say much, right? And that's probably most of the case. It is genuinely the way it would work. So I would say start with yourself, be open, be willing to kind of share a little bit, and ask a lot of genuine questions. Make it genuine, right? And put your heart into it, because people will see whether or not it's not genuine.
Thank you. That's a very helpful strategy to bear in mind and start a conversation with. And our second question comes from Lin Chi. As you mentioned earlier about the 4 career patterns, which one is your favorite? And can you share more about your favorite pattern? Seems like a lot of our audience are so curious about the patterns.
Yeah, it's interesting, this pattern. And first of all, I would say avoid the 2 right columns, the spiral and transitory, because it's really hard to recover, right? But there's high risk and return, right? So I could argue that the spiral one are probably a lot of those entrepreneurs who just really decide, I want to get out of the corporate track and try something really different, start my own company, start my own fund, and then if I get lucky, that 1%, I can take off, which is what it's illustrating, right? When I graduated from university, I studied computer science and mathematics, and I thought I was just going to be a computer programmer for the rest of my life, and that was it. So I actually thought I was going to be that steady state expert. I was just going to be a programmer, happy, and that's it. But turns out I ended up taking this linear thing, which is quite interesting, because I guess it wasn't deliberate, but I guess it ended up happening as a function of my own personality, of just trying to work hard, ideally trust the system to get recognized, try to network with people, and as opposed to getting only boxed into your own department, because the last thing you want to do is just rely purely on the hierarchy, because you have to wait for your boss to get promoted before you get promoted, and that's a very painful process. So try to step out beyond the box and show and network and show what you're capable of, broadly speaking. And I think going to business school helped me to move from that steady state to the linear track, and that's, you know, a nice plug of recognition. That's what Stern helped me in terms of business school. Stern helped me kind of get onto a meaningful track of just management consulting, because before Stern I was at Anderson Consulting for 3 years doing my, you know, grad doing my my programming. And so I'd say that the safer bet is probably doing the systematic linear approach. But again, the element of time, be patient. Don't rush it. Don't get don't get promoted by jumping jobs. Get promoted by being recognized within a company, because employers will look for that. Are you only getting a better title because you changed jobs, or are you actually being recognized because you actually did something good in the company and they promoted you? That's a huge indicator that many employers are looking for, because if someone recognized that you actually did something, if you kept moving on, you may not have actually done something. You just got lucky because there was a empty position that needed to be filled, and that's how you got promoted.
Right, I totally agree with you. And I think the patience will be the best friend, and it will usually like offers you surprise in life. And our next question comes from Jason. As someone more in the mid-career stage, do you have any advice on being open-minded to new experiences or career switching versus creating a single story for your career?
So, I mean, using, I mean, doing a mid-career change, I think, so, I mean, again, I'm an example of a mid-career change, right? So I was doing IT consulting, then management consulting for the first 12 years. And then someone knocked me on the head one day and said, hey, why don't you try Liato? So I've never thought about doing that, because that's probably the last thing any one of us would ever think of. You don't, when I graduated from university, that's not it wasn't natural for me to think about that. I thought I'd just go that different track. It can happen, but usually the mid-career change, I see more success through change, not necessarily through content, but more through culture. People are more successful making a change because of the culture of something that's different, that can leverage something tangible of a previous experience that you may have had. I think I've been able to make this switch going from management consulting into executive search, because even though I never did executive search before, my role in the past was always speaking to CEOs on understanding their strategy, understanding their work. It was not about filling in a position, and that culture fit me in terms of when I joined Egon Zehnder. That's why I've been here for 17 years now. So it can happen, but I would be really thoughtful and mindful. If you're going to do a change, probably, again, it's also about risk management. I would say it's safer to do it within your current company to try to get transferred internally. Just even getting transferred to a different location, internal transfers are always safer than to take a huge leap of faith, because if you make the jump that's too different, it could be last in, first out, and you don't want to take that chance. At least me, I'm more risk adverse.
Right. So the risk management is very important when people are making like the career decisions. And our next question from Edison. Edison has two questions. The first is, what will you recommend us to be patient enough in our career while don't be distracted by the peer pressure? And the second question is, after the pandemic, do you have any thoughts on how should we deal with the uncertainties in a career and even our life? So the first question about peer pressure, and the second is about like how to deal with uncertainties.
Yeah, so peer pressure is always going to be there. I remember when I was kind of doing my consulting back in what, 96 to, from 96 when I was in Singapore and Malaysia to year 2000, I was just doing my management consulting, working with Thai banks, Indonesian banks. And I remember the peer pressure was not really my peer. It was almost like pressure by my tiger mom, who was basically saying, why are you working so hard, 80, 100 hours weeks, and flying all the time, and just making this amount? Why don't you do a .com, right? Why don't you go into real estate, right? So which I'm glad I didn't do, because look at the .com explosion, and look at the financial meltdown later on. But it's you need to be true to yourself in terms of what you're comfortable with and how much risk you want to take. So I think in hindsight, I have the benefit of hindsight. I think what I did was probably the right thing, which was focus on the things that make you happy, the things that um, that you enjoy doing. Because remember, and again, probably back then I was in the 90s. I was probably early 30s, right? And when I'm early 30s, it's gosh, I'm old. In the early 30s, my objective was not about wealth. Some other people it could have been important, but at least it was more about learning and being systematic. And again, I'm a very risk averse person. Some other people, they may think that that's something that they want to try to do, but again, be deliberate and understand that if you want to go take those additional things and fall into peer pressure, you may fall into that spiral trap, or you may fall into the transitory, because if that thing doesn't work out, you may have a gap in your career when the thing shuts down, and then you have to find your next thing. So it just be conscious that you don't want to get into that spiral and transitory. And again, the power and status, that y-axis, is not necessarily about money. It's about also what's relatively important for you, and the feel good factor for yourself. Like, am I doing things that makes me feel happier and happier over time, right? Because this should not be all a discussion about money, because there's more to, I'd like to think there's more to life than money.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to see a lot of our students today are asking questions and limited questions jumping in, but due to the limited time, we can only take the last question. And the last question is from Sinab. So she is curious to know more about your experience as a student in your 20s. And did you ever face decision-making issues? What if you want to do it all and try everything, but end up doing nothing? That's kind of philosophical question.
Yeah, so as a student, try different things, and I hope I can answer the question. I'll try my best. As a student, when you graduate, again, this is just me looking at so many different CVs, so many different meeting, so many people. As a student, I think we should all be like a sponge. We should try not to be so fixated saying, I want to be a marketing director, or I want to be a banker, or I want to go into HR, or I want to be a doctor, right? I say try a lot of different things. And if you're a student today, I think, again, I'm biased. If you don't know what you want to do, go into consulting. Because consulting gives you the excuse of trying a lot of different projects in a lot of different industries without changing jobs. You just change a project, right? And that gives you broader exposure to learning more about what's out there, because you don't know what you don't know. And so the important thing is just try to learn as much as possible. And you know, you've seen it. There are people who go try to be a lawyer and they say they don't want to be a lawyer, or people become a doctor and they end up being like a healthcare analyst. So there are a lot of, so be open-minded, and going back to your objectives, constantly relook at those objectives, those goals of what's important. They will change. And so also kind of keep a pulse on that. Don't be fixated that that's the only thing that's important. If you don't have huge family obligations and you are flexible, don't let location be a kind of defining factor in terms of how you define a criteria for your next job selection. Again, be really open-minded. Let life kind of take you where it takes you, but also be quite thoughtful and mindful on your decision, because once you decide, it's kind of hard to undo it, right? So you may want to discuss it with your closest friends, find a mentor, find someone you trust. Again, this is the green people, right? Green people don't necessarily, those are people that would guide you, people that are important to you, people who are a couple years ahead of you. speak to other people in the industry and get networked through their networks, right? Again, it takes time, so start developing those networks as soon as possible.
Right, life is a beautiful journey, and I always believe all dots will finally connect in life. And in this journey, I also hope like our audience, please keep in mind not only your personal career development benefits, but also how you can further enlarge your social impact, especially the positive social impact, and make the effective contributions to the whole world. So today we really feel very thankful and grateful for Peter's precious time and invaluable sharing. And we also appreciate CDC's great help and support in providing this great opportunity for us to have this conversation. And after this talk, for our audience, if you hope to take concrete actions, I would recommend you to identify your favorite career patterns, start to exercise your networking skills, go to CDC more often, and to establish your professional reputation and core competencies. So thanks, Peter, again for your precious time and amazing sharing. And we wish everyone will have a promising and satisfactory career path ahead. And I believe you guys will have the brightest future as long as you are always on the way. There's nothing gonna stop you, and we will all become limitless. Thank you again for this beautiful 1 hour.
Thank you all.